You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. I am Urza Master. Joining me as always, Lord Uther, and our brand new, non-recurring, now permanent, recurring host, FERT Derby. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, welcome.
Yay.
Glad to have y'all back. We are here at episode 50, 5-0. A huge milestone for the Warp Core Podcast. If you are a subscriber, which you should be, click that link down below, hit that notification button, stay up to date with the Warp Core Podcast here at Pending Rebrand. You will have known that we've gone where no podcast has gone before, at least in the aplomb that we do, and that is through all of the original series films, all of the next-gen films, all of seasons 1 and 2 of Strange New Worlds, and here we are, now deep into season 2 of Star Trek, the original series. And let me tell you, fellas, I'm excited to talk about today's episode, Friday's Child. This is an entry in season 2, I think, that bears worth of some deep discussion. But I would be remiss if I didn't turn it over to FERT Derby, our background enthusiast, knowledgeable man. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, Urza Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And welcome back, Trekkies, to episode 50 of the Warp Core. We're so excited to still be here with you as we will be continuing our 3-year mission, as it turns out, to explore Strange New Worlds. We will pick this up on December 1st, 1967. Just in time for the holiday season with Friday's Child. We have returning champion director Joseph Pevney back behind the camera, and we have co-showrunner and behind-the-scenes do-it-all DC Fontana scripted this episode. We even have a big-name guest star in this one, Julie Newmar, whom many of us fondly remember as the Catwoman in Adam West's kooky, campy take on the Batman legend that also aired in the late 60s on network television, before Tim Burton and Michael Keaton took it to a much darker place, courtesy of Frank Miller, when the Dark Knight iteration of the Cape Crusader arrived. But Julie Newmar, she even got a shout out in a Patrick Swayze, John Leguizamo, Wesley Snipes drag comedy to Julie Newmar. Thanks for everything, or Wong Fu, to Wong Fu, thanks for everything, Julie Newmar, that played in the mid-90s. So she's here, and she's got baby issues. And she and Dr. McCoy will play a significant role in this episode. The title, Friday's Child, I'm sure it has a haunting echo in your memories. It actually is taken from an 1887 Harper's Weekly poem, which included the line, "Friday's child is full of woe." And this is where DC Fontana draws on. So, what we have here is an episode that kind of walks a tightrope, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so, in terms of, again, an ambition in trying to tell a story versus what ended up actually on the small screen. For one, we have another classic Enterprise sort of versus Klingons with another society kind of in the center. And we've seen that dynamic play out before. In this case, we also get to cut away from planet side to Scotty and the Enterprise tracking down a potential Klingon ruse and threat and so forth. And I have to say, for this viewer, the stuff on the Enterprise is handled very well. There's a lot of tension. It has that sort of balance of terror, kind of suspense, the classic, we're a submarine hunting U-boats and so forth, being pulled away from the main action by a distress signal ruse and then figuring it out. I would say the only slight flaw I would have on that side of the episode is that we don't get that confrontation, right? We don't get to unleash photon torpedoes or phasers. We don't get to have a battle just to sort of show the Klingons, hey, you're messing around with the Federation flagship. It kind of gets resolved off screen and so forth, so you let a little air out of the balloon. But for most of this episode, what's going on up in space is far more compelling than what's happening planetside. How do I count the ways? Let's start with where the first half of the episode is clearly, done on a Desilu soundstage, and you've got your, pink mood lighting for the sunset, and you've got your paper mache rocks and so forth, and you're interacting, your tents, your Bedouin tents that they all camp out in. And that's fine. If you're going to do that type of an episode, that's fine. But then about halfway through, suddenly, we're back on a field trip to Vasquez Rocks. And like many of our Vasquez Rocks episodes, I mean, it's not only jarring from just sort of a visual look, like here we are in actual fauna and flora versus we're up on a set, down in Hollywood. But once again, the worst instincts of our cast and crew with Vasquez Rocks, we have a lot of running around, a lot of scenes that feel stretched out as far as like the choreography. Like, Spock, you go climb that rock. And then I want you to climb down that rock. And then in a couple scenes later, we'll have you climb up a different rock. And I just feel like I think everybody was just so excited to be out in the fresh air and the beautiful sunshine that they just treated it like a junior high, middle school field trip, as opposed to making sure that we're tightening the tension at any course. And my fellow Starfleet officers here will I'm sure sound off on such things. The costuming of our planet, of our population planet, it's a little goofy. I'm not going to lie. It looks like that they're wearing curtain sashes or other elaborate fabrics. And I understand it's supposed to underscore this is an alien society, but it just, coming from a modern viewpoint, it just again looks a little silly at times as far as all that goes. There's some musical gaiety and lightness in this episode. I took a note, and Star Trek again when they're up in space matching wits with the Klingons, you can get that tension, that underscore, that suspense that drives the action. We know that they're very capable of that, but the little musical zips and zings that they kind of throw in can also undercut some of that, or at least call attention to themselves. And again, a great score should kind of be the heartbeat or the pulse. You hear it and you kind of respond to it in this vicarious, even subliminal way as it's helping drive the story, the narrative, the characters forward. But if it becomes a distraction, it's very hard to unring that bell and just kind of, push it, compartmentalize it and push it aside. Once they've crossed the line to where you're making fun of it or you can't help but notice it, then you've got problems. John Williams, probably our greatest living composer of our generation and our age and many generations. You never stopped in the middle of one of his stirring scores for E.T. or Harry Potter or Indiana Jones or Star Wars or Jaws and said, yeah, that doesn't sound right. And so it's one of those things there where you know it when you hear it. We have another, Pevney did this in Journey to Babel, which he also directed, which we also talked about on the Warp Core. In fact, that was our episode number 49. So you don't have to go very far back into the Wayback Machine in order to enjoy that. But he has this new thing now where suddenly, without warning, we'll go from one scene to the middle of a fight scene. Like we will just snap. I think he kind of fell in love with this technique. He's like, all right, we'll do dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. Quick, they're punching each other, like in a hole. And this is the second episode in a row that he's tried that. So I don't know if the studio execs will eventually say, hey, Joseph, come on, we need a little lead in here, or if this is something we might see going forward with him. I felt for this particular episode, and I don't say this that often of the character nor the actor, because he's a consummate professional and he's fantastic. I thought that Leonard Nimoy, his performance as Spock in here, I thought he looked bored. And when you look at the dialogue that he was given and like what he was asked to do in the scenes, it was mainly just to kind of reiterate, you know, a scientific jargon or what have you, or, you know, agree with Kirk or so forth. Like there wasn't really that dynamic Vulcan characterization here. Like for the first time, I just kind of saw him like, all right, I'm going to hit my mark. Here's the line. Let's, you know, move on to the next scene. And like I say, he's too good an actor and too professional a performer to let that be his standard. But I just thought in here, and it'd be fascinating, you know, to have found out if there was something going on, you know, whether he was unhappy with episode rewrites or there was something else going on. But he just did not look like the Spock, the engaged, complete character that we're kind of used for. I mean, contrast that with Scotty, who just loves commanding the Enterprise. I mean, I feel like we missed a whole Montgomery Scott getting his own ship story, you know, and maybe Strange New Worlds, you know, who knows? Maybe they can give us a couple of things like that, little nods, because he's like to the manner born. Like he knows when to go with communications and when to go with weapons, and I love seeing Scotty on the bridge, and I think he does a fantastic job there. And then I want you guys to sound off on McCoy. He definitely dominates this episode, and he has some pretty good lines. He also sets male-female relations back a few years with a couple of slaps delivered to our guest actress Julie Newmar. And you can debate the wisdom of Uchi Wuchi Coochie Coo, because I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot tribble. But Uchi Wuchi Coochie Coo, shame on you, DC Fontana, for not only putting that in, you know, the first time, but then the 3 or 4 times afterwards that it came through. So, what do you think, Starfleet officers? This one is a mixed bag from my seat on the bridge.
I actually really enjoyed this episode for its campiness. I have to admit, I loved, like you said, it's a dichotomy of an episode. You have a really compelling Scotty-led Enterprise mission, confident, cool, resolved, just shall we say, a bit of a Picard-like presence on the Enterprise. Fantastic. From that point of view, that portion of the episode was really flawless. I think it was executed almost perfectly. Then you get sort of a 2-part episode built into like the other half of the episode here, which is, as you put, a little jarring, a little fluid at times between whether it was being serious or silly, which I found enjoyable only because it was kind of goofy from the premise, like this warlike people that wants to be entertained by battle but also don't really want to fight each other. They don't immediately side with the Klingons because they sort of want what the Federation has to offer. And there's just some real weird indecision that just doesn't feel right. Like the characterization of these aliens just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then to her end, I thought Julie Newmar did a fantastic job in her part. Because I think, you know, being a pregnant, about to give birth person, that is, her performance is kind of what I would feel is sort of spot on. Like, she's sort of living up to her culture, but also, like, really doesn't want to go through with the I'm ready to die thing. I think deep in her subconscious, and is ultimately just kind of confused about what's going on. Kind of deals with the whole like postpartum syndrome where like she doesn't really want the baby because it's not really hers, and McCoy's trying to convince her like, no, this is your baby, and then she's like, this is your baby. And I actually thought it was kind of cute and played well into the character, the alien culture, you know, that they were trying to portray. I actually thought that was done pretty well. McCoy being the good country doctor, as you know, we'll see in later episodes and as we saw in the films, like he really comes across as like a southern country doctor here with the slapping and the, you know, I'm going to touch your belly and then I'm going to know exactly what's going on with the baby. It's like, it's because I'm a doctor. It's kind of because you have like super advanced like medical knowledge that these people don't have, where palpitating a pregnant woman's belly, you probably can know a lot, but there's no way to know that, you know, this or that is really going to happen. That being said, she moves around pretty well for somebody who just gave a natural birth. I mean, I realize she's an alien, but a natural birth to what appears to be like a 2-month-old. You know, and then she's running around, and you know, it's like it's a little odd. But you know, they couldn't show like real labor on TV. Like there's no screaming, there's no like. You know, it had to be sort of that mysterious, magical thing that nobody talks about that is definitely counter to, I think, what Star Trek would normally do, even in the era. But there's only so much one can push with the execs, I'm sure, as well at the time. Although with Desilu, you would think she would be a little more inclined to be like, no, we should show, like, real pain of childbirth. But in the alien context, maybe they didn't have time. Maybe they got written out. I don't know. The deep flaw with this episode, beyond just the Klingon, and they kept saying Klingon, and that really drove me up a wall. But beyond the Klingon, who seems awfully cowardly for a Klingon, and the goofy little, you know, fidget spinners they throw at each other, and how they just sort of like, they are start out as a deadly weapon and then they just sort of ting off of a rock and Spock can sort of just step out of the way. They've never invented the bow of all things, like, and they're just like, they're grabbing an obvious twig and making a bow and arrow. These arrows aren't even straight, but they're somehow flying true. They're just sharpened, you know, tips. Like, they hit him in the knee, and it's definitely Ace Ventura is inspired by this, where he's like, ah! It's like, come on. Some of this is, like, beyond the realm of goofy to almost like, really? I mean, this is, like, early 50s, maybe late 40s, like, cowboys and Indians type action. But I still kind of enjoyed it. I have to admit. I think I was so lost in the goofiness of it that it actually made me kind of smile. And frankly, I liked the fact that they used the absurdity a little bit. And I think that's where that Gucci Coochie Coo came from at the end. Oh, it's an ancient Earth language. I'm like, that's so stupid. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, but maybe they, like, and this is why I think maybe Spock was disengaged. It's like, maybe they sort of realized that this episode is not a real winner. Like, half of this episode has the potential to be a great episode of Star Trek. The other half is like, you know, I think of it as the chop suey of Star Trek episodes. They sort of just took all the leftover ideas on the table, scooped them into a bowl and fried it, and then gave it to us and said, here you go, here's some sweet sauce. For me, it worked. It was successful. I was entertained. But is this? Well, we'll talk about it in our Warp Core ratings. Is this like a penultimate episode of Star Trek? No, not at all.
Friday's child should have been Monday's child because I just wanted to get it over with. All right. What is going on here? They're throwing these planet. Oh man, what was the name of that show that Battle of the Planet type of like weapons through the air that look like these bird things that make whistling noises. Like you said, Spock just dodges out of the way. They fire a bow and arrow. The arrow looks like it's like only going to travel 3 feet, but somehow travels like 100 feet and hits the guy perfectly in the leg. I just, who, why? Someone tell me why. Like, I just don't understand what they were thinking about when they did this episode. McCoy is just, seems to be off his rocker with this country type of, like that Southern, like they keep trying to do the Southern Doctor thing. And I mean, I get it because it's part of the character, but then like he's supposed to be fatherly now. Yeah, and then the baby sounds. I just, no, I can't.
Lest we forget,
say anymore.
I'm a doctor, not an escalator. I did jot that down.
But you know, yes. Here's you bring up a great point though about giving Scotty his own ship, because we see Sulu with his own ship. Now it's obviously way down the line, but when I remember seeing Sulu in that chair, wondering how that was going to go, and it went beautifully, like it was perfect. And we see that here with Scotty. So you kind of have to ask yourself as well, who could have really had their own shows or been a captain like that? Spock probably could have, right? Scotty. We see Dr. Crusher down the line, right? In the very last episode where she had her own ship, so she kind of takes that on. So I think those are interesting, almost like what ifs. That's the kind of stuff I wouldn't mind seeing, even if they did it in a cartoon format where they do a what if, which I guess Marvel's doing that right now. Anyway.
It's really good, though.
Yeah, I've heard it is good. I shouldn't have done that. I was thinking of the Star Wars episodes, like the last two Star Wars movies, and that always makes me nauseous, but...
Sigh.
I know, heavy sigh. But that'd be kind of cool, and that's what I thought maybe that Legacy, or the Star Trek Legacy was going to be, was these one-offs, which I don't even know if we know what's going to happen with that.
It sounds like they may not be doing it. But that brings up a good point, is that one of the cool things about what they're doing with Star Trek these days is they are exploring where no man has gone before. In the sense that, you know, you've got Seven of Nine now, who really I don't think at any point ever came across as a command character. She was a very dominant personality, but that was mostly the Borg in her. She's far less Borgy in Picard, and you know we've talked about Picard on the show, but to put her in charge of an Enterprise, I think is a great idea, and certainly opens up the possibility of like a what if style show. I mean, we've already had the animated series. There's no reason why you couldn't make a TOS extension series with these characters and do something like that.
Which, so you know what? Their FERT Derby. So here's my question to you. To me, a cartoon series seems to almost be the answer to any series that either comes to an abrupt halt, or, you know, some of the characters pass away. And you know what I'm going to bring up right now when I say that is Twin Peaks. Like, what are we waiting for to truly end that correctly? Well, you could go with a cartoon series. They tried it with Star Trek. Why don't we see more of that? Or do you think we're going to see more of that? And is it easier nowadays to do something like that? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not like they have to go in studio to do their lines, right? They could literally probably call their lines in, which I was going to ask you about that with our other podcast, The Graying Jedi, because I was going to ask you about Pedro Pascal yesterday. Does he go into a studio and do those lines? Is he doing something like this where he's on a computer and he gets to see the action and talk it over? How do those things work? And why don't we see more of maybe the cartoon route? I'd have to think it'd be cheaper as well, but you're the expert, so I'm going to throw it to you.
Well, an animated show, I mean, we're far cry from the early Hanna-Barbera, Warner Brothers Looney Tunes, Woody Woodpecker type animation. I mean, as you might say, on our other broadcast of The Graying Jedi, which, again, pending rebrand fans, you need to be subscribing, and you need to be subscribing right now.
Do it now!
Dave Filoni,
Fly her apart!
that's where he cut his teeth, was with the animation. And we've had the Clone Wars, we've had Rebels, now we have the Bad Batch, which is a fantastic show. But the cost of doing good animation now, even though they actually do a lot of it overseas in Singapore and Taiwan and Australia and so forth, it's still, the economics of it are not, you do have to kind of factor that in. And most of the current, like Star Wars animated shows, Clone Wars was sort of an outlier. They ended up with 7 seasons, over a decade. Rebels gave us 4, and Bad Batch is going to sign off with this upcoming 3rd season later this spring. In fact, I think beginning next week. So yeah, animation is probably less expensive. You can get voice cast members. I mean, Mark Hamill can do Luke Skywalker as an animation and not have to worry that he looks like right now. So yes, there are pluses, and I would definitely hope that you could see that. But I think some studios say, well, for the amount of money we're going to spend versus, like, let's say for streaming or for television, Fox has built their network. Some of their entire weekend slate is animation, Simpsons and Crapopolis and whatever they're doing there. So that they're committed, but I don't know that everybody is fully on board with it. It's also a long lead-in time, like animation takes, whereas a show can just go on a regular production cycle, shoot your season, take your summer off, come back and shoot in the next season. Animation can sometimes, based on delays or what have you, that might take a year, or add on another 6 months to 8 months, which again you're paying people to work on that. So would I love to see a Twin Peaks with Kyle MacLachlan voicing that? Yes, absolutely. And I think that animation has come beyond just, oh, that's for kids. Like, there's nothing in the Bad Batch that is objectionable to a family audience, but it is clearly, like Andor, kind of aimed at that older Star Wars sophisticated audience, much like a Guillermo del Toro rendition of Pinocchio is not your Walt Disney's 1940s adaptation. So I think animation has matured, and I think it definitely is a way to go. Briefly on the Pedro Pascal, I'm not sure exactly in what location he's doing his dialogue, and we'll talk about this a lot more on The Graying Jedi, but his on-set, on-camera performances, as in that's me underneath the helmet, have significantly decreased. In fact, to the point where there is some speculation, despite the fact that the character will probably be featured in not 1 but 2 big screen Star Wars movies to come, whether or not he will actually ever step foot on a set versus just recording his lines. That's still very much in question, I think. But we'll get into that more as we move further along. On The Graying Jedi, friends, you don't want to miss it.
Definitely subscribe.
You definitely want to subscribe. But no, I think you've seen Star Trek animation now with Lower Decks, and it's kind of like they're really taking it to a new fun level. But a super straight, like you say, Star Trek Legacy with Jerry Ryan voicing something, or John Delancey. Like, you don't have to worry what John Delancey looks like. You can animate Q any number of ways. I think that would be something that would get fans excited, and if Paramount was willing to pony up. This is the same Paramount, mind you, that is trying to sell itself to any interested buyer, including Warner Brothers, which I think would be a disaster to combine Warner Brothers and Paramount and just have Paramount basically go away. So like right now, like, it's never been a more exciting time to have Star Trek in our lives, but in the same breath, like, the studio itself is so depressed financially in terms of, even with a Top Gun Maverick grossing billions worldwide, like, we'll have to see where it all goes. I don't know that they're going to be, committing 6, 8, $800 million in future Trek projects over, 5 or 6 different projects without having a better sense of who's even going to be writing those checks.
Yeah, and that's why we dive into Star Trek now. I think we would all love to see an animated series revival for Legacy or future shows. The one beef I have with Lower Decks and Prodigy is the style of animation.
Right.
I really would rather see an older style, like an animated series type. Smoother, obviously, updated, but kind of like what they're doing with X-Men 97, I think would be really cool to see. And you could have all the voice actors, it doesn't have to be the sort of choppy, campy, hand-drawn, it can be computer animated, but it can be done in the style of, where it's a little more true to character.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I do think it's prudent to give Friday's Child its due and give it some Warp Core ratings. And I'll save mine for last. But FERT Derby, what number of Warp Cores out of our traditional 7 do you give Friday's Child?
Well, I have to say, Urza Master, you make a compelling case that I should just lighten up and not be so darn serious. Why so serious? So I've actually upgraded in real time. There's a ceiling for this kind of shenanigans and tomfoolery. I'm going to cap it at 5, and 4 3/4 of that is doing the heavy lifting up in space with Scotty and the crew. But that being said, if I just approach this more, because season 2 of the original series, friends, has been kind of a roller coaster of quality and so forth. We've had some really high highs, and we've had a couple of shocking lows. This doesn't descend into Who Mourns for Adonis or maybe The Apple, but it is uneven. Let's call it uneven. So it will never be a top tier medal winning podium, but considering that it probably could have just gone completely bananas, I feel like I think you've put me in a better spot to appreciate it. And let's just go with a solid 5 for the 5-0, which is the number of Warp Core episodes that we have unleashed on you, our pending rebrand audience.
No, I've actually downgraded during this conversation from my original number. I will go 2.5. If it wasn't for Scotty, this might have been, and the Enterprise stuff, it might have been right up there. Again, not as bad as the one where the guy is phasing in and out of existence. I don't know why I can never remember that one. I think it's because I try and purge it from my mind all the time. Is that the Adonis effect or whatever that is?
The alternative factor? Is that?
The alternative. Oh,
Yeah.
See, I don't even want to remember the name of it because it makes me nauseous. So 2.5. It's look, I'm just happy Star Trek was on that week, so that way the next episode would come up. So 2.5 for me. Don't fully eject the warp core, but shut that thing down.
Critical mass for Lord Uther.
Yes.
I won't go as high as 5. 5 is a little much for me. I'm solid at a 4 out of 7 warp cores. Scotty absolutely saves this episode. I did find there to be more enjoyable parts, perhaps on the other end of this show or this episode, but not enough. It was definitely disjointed, definitely a little bit unorganized and campy at times. Julie Newmar was great, but the writing for her was poor. And that could have been for any number of reasons. I feel like her foils just didn't give her justice, perhaps, or at some point there was a rewrite that probably happened that took away some lines that set her up as a stronger character. So 4 out of 7 warp cores for me. Definitely not the worst episode. Not really great or even really good, but solid. A solid Star Trek episode. There's enough Star Trek-y Star Trek going on to satisfy my desires. And again, it was for me just more enjoyment than it was like actual entertainment. I enjoyed watching it because it was goofy. Was I entertained as a Star Trek fan? Partially. So, with that, we conclude our 50th episode of the Warp Core podcast. Thank you, everyone who follows us here at Pending Rebrand, who've been with us for 50 episodes. We look forward to the next 50 and beyond as our continuing mission into all things Star Trek, well, continues. With that, live long and prosper.
Uchi coochie coochie coo.